Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, and this is Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. This episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books has been sponsored by Nene's Treats, N-E-N-E-S, Treats, nenestreats.com, an amazing family-owned and operated crumb cake business based in Charleston, South Carolina. You can buy their delicious crumb cakes at nenestreats.com or on goldbelly.com. Nene's Treats, you won't leave a crumb. I'm here today with Rebecca Schrag Hershberg, Ph.D., who's the author of the Tantrum Survival Guide. Tune into your toddler's mind and your own to calm the craziness and make family fun again. A clinical psychologist and founder of Little House Calls Psychological Services, which helps kids and parents face all sorts of challenges, Rebecca has written many helpful articles about early childhood issues. She's taught at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine and has led many seminars and workshops for parents. A graduate of Yale University with a Ph.D. from the University of Virginia, she currently lives with her husband and two young sons in the New York area, where she was born and raised. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Rebecca and I went to high school and college together, so this will be more of an informal, probably, tone than some other podcasts.
But I keep thinking if our 16-year-old selves could see us now, their minds would be blown.
I still feel like you had the coolest room in high school. I begged my mom to remodel my room based on your bulletin board. Do you remember that?
I do remember that. And what was funny is that I had the least designed. It was buy some stuff and put it on the wall.
I know, but it was it was the coolest. You were the coolest.
Oh, thank you.
Anyway, so your book, congratulations.
Thank you.
Awesome. The tone of your book is so great, as if I'm just sitting here chatting with you today. Even the first sentence of your book, it sets the whole tone. You say, "Hi, I can't believe you pulled it off. You found a few minutes of downtime to start this book." So immediately when I read that, I'm like, this is going to be great. I feel understood. You get it. In fact, then you go on to say just that. You say, "I get it. I do. I too am a parent. I have two little boys, 21 months apart. Did I mention I get it?" So it's so refreshing. There's so many experts out there, but it's refreshing for an expert to be sort of so disarming like that and just be like, yeah, I'm in it with you. So tell me how you ended up writing this book in the midst of running a psychological practice and raising two little kids.
Yeah, no, it's a very good question, and it's actually a good segue from what you just said, because it's this unheard of thing that happened to me, which is that I just got a cold call from an editor. I was on maternity leave with my second, and I will never forget, because it was I was exhausted and, unshowered and all the rest, and I was deciding to go for a walk, which, as you know, is this big decision. And I got a call from an unknown number that I didn't accept. And I listened to the voicemail, and it was an editor at Guilford Press saying that she had read some of the articles I'd written and particularly been impressed with exactly what you just said, which is that there was an expert voice and a mom's voice that were very seamlessly kind of interwoven, and asked if I'd be interested in writing a book. And I, of course, assumed that this was some quack, because who does that, and I Googled and I was like, oh no, this is the real deal. And I really was hesitant to do it because I was so tired and so busy, but I've always loved to write. And I am smart enough to know that opportunities like that don't come along every day. And so had a real conversation with my husband about whether we could pull it off, because of course, all these decisions involve family things shifting. And yeah, pulled it off. Part of it, I think, was an out-of-body experience. But I did it. It was some late nights and some jiggering, but yeah, it's done.
Awesome. So exciting.
Thank you.
So let's talk about tantrums.
Let's do it.
Ready?
Let's do it.
So why do kids have tantrums? Go. Go. Take it away.
Why do kids have tantrums? Well, kids have tantrums because, there's so many reasons, and the book obviously goes into it, but at its most basic level, a tantrum is an expression of an emotion that's too overwhelming for kids to process without having a tantrum. So where tantrums tend to emerge, they can be a little earlier and a little later, but roughly between, say, 18 months and 5 years, when part of the brain that can do things that prevent us from having tantrums, like exert our judgment, plan, express ourselves, is not fully developed. And what is fully developed is the emotional part of the brain, which we're born with. And so when kids are calm, you see them have various skills that they're developing. But once they're emotional, the emotional brain kind of hijacks the thinking brain, and they're off to the races. And adults have that as well. We're better at controlling it. But the times when we kind of lose our minds is the exact same thing. It's that our emotional brain isn't really kind of talking to our logical brain. And so you may know that what you're upset about makes no sense whatsoever, but you're still there.
And that never happens to me.
Of course not. No, Zibby, even when you were younger, never.
Okay, but then in your book, you say you can't totally stop the tantrums. but you can help manage them. So,
yeah, and that's a really important... I'm sorry, did I just interrupt you?
No, it just, you also said that you don't want to extinguish them altogether, that there are some benefits to tantrums.
Yeah, well, tantrums are normal. And they're expected, and they're happening at a time when little kids are figuring out who they are and how the world works and how relationships work and how feelings work. And most kids, and I'm going to say most because I would never say every single one, but most kids have tantrums because it's part of a developmental trajectory that's healthy. And so I take objection when articles say, 10 quick ways to stop tantrums once and for all. It's like, that's just not going to happen, and you wouldn't want it to. When I've seen rarely a child or a family in my office where the child is having no tantrums, there's often a sign that something else is going on. There's like some real anxiety or things don't feel safe at home. It's like somehow there's a military school atmosphere. And so, yes, kids in that extreme circumstance can possibly hold it together, but you don't want that.
Right.
Does that answer that question?
Yeah, that's good. That's great.
All right.
And you said there were 5 possible red flags that signal that tantrums may be a sign of something to worry about.
Yeah. So, and I always hesitate to talk about them simply because parents freak out. I mean, I will, and I'll tell you what they are. But before I say them, I want to say that one of the things I say in the book that's, I think, extremely important to remember is that there really is no formula. The idea that, like, if your child has 3 tantrums a day and 1 is more than an hour, but 2, it's just false that that's going to be a way to figure out if there's something to worry about. Generally, though, the research has shown that there's 5 things to look at when you're looking at, are these normal, developmentally appropriate tantrums, or potentially correlated with a later mental health diagnosis, and they are frequency. So is your child having 10 to 20 tantrums a day over 30 days at home, or some fewer number that I'm not remembering exactly out of the home? Duration, are they generally or typically more than half an hour? And I'll have parents say to me, oh my gosh, yes, I remember this one time my kid lost his mind for an hour. And I always say, right, you remember that one time, right? It stands out in your head because that was so bizarre. Right. Most of the time tantrums are, between 2 and 8 minutes. And that's what ideally, quote unquote, you want. Then there's self-injury. Again, nothing to freak out about. It is completely normal for kids to hit themselves, pinch themselves, bang their head into the wall, mostly because they're kind of looking at you at the same time and they know that that's what's going to make you come running. If your child is repeatedly scratching him or herself, biting him or herself, really doing that kind of extreme self-injurious behavior, that's often something to worry about. Similarly with aggression, the 4th one is aggression toward other people, which it's the same caveat, right. Totally normal to a certain extent. Right. And then the last is self-soothing. So can your child come down? With your help, perhaps with a teacher's help, with a caregiver's help, but is it incredibly effortful to get your child to calm down every time? Again, I don't want any parents listening to say oh gosh, last week I could barely calm my kid. It's right, this all happens to all of us, which is why I hesitate to make it a formula. But I think it's important for parents to know that if those 5 things are ringing a bell, it may be worth seeking professional advice. And then that person may still say there's nothing to worry about, right. But it's just those are the flags that signal let's get somebody else in here to take a look.
Okay. I always like to go to the worst case scenario. So thanks for covering that up front. Okay, so your kid's having a tantrum. It's 8 minutes. For instance, this morning, my son didn't want to put on his socks. How do you know the difference between, okay, fine, are socks that important? It's pretty warm out, but not giving in, right? Once they start tantruming, you can't change your mind. Isn't that the whole deal?
No. I mean, yeah.
He ended up not wearing any socks.
Yeah. It's delightful out. I just came in from, I'm not wearing any socks. That's a misconception, I think. I mean, again, in part it's a misconception because it's a quote unquote easy rule. It's once this happens, never do this. And I think it's easy to say that and to have parents say okay, now I know what to do, but it's not realistic. What you want to do, and what I think the book emphasizes, is get to a point where you can pause in that moment and make a thoughtful decision about whether you want your kid to wear socks or not. So you're not saying ideally, and again, if you did this morning, then you're still a fantastic mom. But it's not you know what, fine, forget it. Just don't wear socks. We're not wearing socks. It's more okay, let me pause for a second. Yeah. Think about whether this is a battle I want to fight. Think about the pros, cons, whatever, and then say, okay, I thought about it. Here's the deal. I give the example in the book, and I will, because I talk to parents about exactly this. Each scenario is a choice point, and you're not going to make or break your kid's general behavior by one incident. Do you want to trend toward consistency? Of course. That's why we've all heard that rule. Of course, ideally, most of the time, once your kid is tantruming, you're not giving in. But that doesn't mean that if sometimes you do for various reasons, you're kind of messing everything up. And I always give the example, my oldest, Henry, he must have been about 3. And we'd sort of talked about how he could only call me in the middle of the night if like there was an emergency, and we'd defined emergency. But at one point he called me into his room about 2 a.m. and said there was no more ice in his water and he wanted more ice. And my first reaction was, that's insane. No way. It's 3 a.m. I'm not going downstairs to get you more ice. You can have lukewarm water at 3 a.m. And he started to have a tantrum, and I was able to, and this is not always the case, but I was able to pause and think, like, what do I want to do here? Do I want to really toe the line on this and like really not give in and not give him the ice on principle? Or, and this is the path I chose, am I exhausted? Do I have a long day at work tomorrow? I don't know if this is something he's going to do every single night. If he does, then I'll deal with it. But right now, I just am going to choose the path of least resistance and get him the ice the way that you did this morning and told him not to wear his socks. And that's fine. And then you'll see if that happens every morning, as it gets colder and colder, then you'll say, you know what, it's time for me to draw the line on this one. But we need the data to know if towing the line in that way makes so much sense. Does that?
Yes.
It was like a long answer.
No, I like it. No, it actually took some pressure off, because every time I don't do what I think I'm supposed to do in a tantrum situation and I give in a little bit, I feel like some sort of failure. Like, oh God, I was supposed to, let this tantrum just derail the whole morning and whatever, but I don't have time for that right now. And we have to get to school.
And nobody does. And and again, tantrums are emotions, and every tantrum is different. And the book, I hope, takes a complicated topic and simplifies it a little bit, because, you can say, is he having a tantrum because he doesn't want to wear socks? Yes. Is he also maybe having a tantrum because he didn't sleep great last night? Fine. Is he having a tantrum because he didn't spend time with you over the weekend and is missing connectedness? Like, ideally, you want to be able to, and this really just takes practice, but in the moment, kind of anticipate what's going on with your kid. Mm-hmm. And if your kid is not a kid who tends to, most of the time, engage in these behaviors as a way of pushing you to give in, then you don't have to worry about it as much. There's no one size fits all for this stuff. And I think in this age of punchy headlines and so on and so forth, people try to make it seem like that's the case. And for good and bad, it's not that simple.
And what about the advice to just ignore tantrums? Because sometimes I end up doing that. I know that's not necessarily in the book, but...
yeah, it is.
Is it?
It is.
Okay, you can ignore them?
Yeah, I talk about something called strategic attention, which is... And parents...
That was so well said that I I didn't just say...
I'm glad you missed that point entirely, because it means my book is really well written.
No, I'm sorry.
No, it just means because I'll say I'll start talking about strategic attention, and parents will always say to me like, oh, this is not about attention. My kid gets so much attention, and don't worry, and it's not about that. It's about when we give our kids attention.
Right.
So and I see this like as it gets colder, not today because your son didn't wear socks, but as it generally gets colder out, I'll see that all the time with like put on your jacket or put on your shoes. If a child doesn't put on their jacket, they suddenly get 10 more minutes with you. You put your phone down, you stop paying attention to the siblings, whatever it is, and like you are just focused on getting them to put their coat on. Whereas if they actually put their coat on the first time you ask, maybe if you're really tuned in, you'll say, thanks so much. But then you'll go on to something else. And so it ends up rewarding them to not do what you want. If that's what you feel like is going on as a general trend, then those are great tantrums to ignore.
Okay.
Come put your coat on. No, I'm not going to put my coat on. Okay, you let me know when you're ready. In the meantime, I'm going to hang out with your sister, or I'm going to return some emails. I say, like, take out your phone. We all take out our phones when our kids are being terrific, because we're like, oh, I have some time. I can return some emails. The best thing to do is kind of shift that and take out your phone when your kid is starting to be, again, not having a full-on tantrum. I would say once your kid is having a full-on tantrum, it's best to maybe say something empathic, something kind before totally ignoring. But in the lead up to it, when they're starting to kind of potentially get there, And the other thing is, I'm talking a lot, so stop.
Good,
but
no, keep going. That's why you're here. I want to hear what you have to say.
The other thing that I think is so important is that ignoring doesn't have to be mean. Like ignoring ideally doesn't come from a place of, you know what, fine, I'm just not going to pay any attention to you until you blah, blah, blah. You can communicate, and it's so valuable to communicate that you are on the same team with your child. You're just giving them some space, right? So you're saying, you know what, it really is time to put your coat on. I'm sorry you're having a hard time with that. I get that you really love t-shirts, whatever. I'm gonna write some emails, and I know you can pull it together. Right. I know you can do this. I know your body knows how to calm itself down. So that way you're still doing the desired thing, which is pulling away the attention. So you're not reinforcing the tantrum, but you're not adding this other element of like, I'm angry at you, I'm shaming you, there's something wrong with this, you're messing up our whole morning, that kind of thing. Okay. It's a much simpler, just remove the attention.
The other morning, my daughter didn't want to put her coat on. This is exactly what you're saying, on the way to school. And I was like, you should put it on. It's cold outside, whatever. She's like, I don't want to wear my coat. Just don't. And all of a sudden, I'm like, these poor little kids. Like, we tell them what to do all the time. If somebody told me what to do as much as I tell my kids what to do, I would want to, run away and never come back. So I was like, you know what? Why don't you hold onto your jacket? And if it's really cold outside, you'll probably want to put it on. So she's like, okay. So she holds onto this cute little jean jacket she just got. And we go downstairs and we walk 2 blocks and she looks at me, Mama, I'm cold. And I was like, oh, good thing you have your jacket. And she just put it on. And now we don't.
Yeah.
Don't have to
and that's such a great point. I mean, so much of being with little kids, and the book talks, is seeing the world through their eyes. It's like she's a human being. She wants to decide. And there's certain things like, no, she doesn't decide when she gets to go to bed or every day what she's having for breakfast. But to the extent we can build in choice and autonomy, it goes so far. And then particularly in this current climate, not to go down the political route, but to say something like, yeah, you know your needs, you know your body, you'll know when you get cold. Right. Really emphasizes a message of like, yeah, you, even at this young age, you know yourself better than anybody, even mommy. Yep. And you can have, again, some autonomy over some of these decisions, particularly ones that have to do with being cold, which by definition you can't possibly know if she feels that.
Yeah, maybe she wasn't cold.
Right.
Yeah. And then last night, not to keep talking about my kids, last night she didn't want to have salmon. And she was like, I'm not going to have dinner. I'm not. And I was like, okay. And frankly, sometimes with 4 kids, if one kid is having a thing like that, I just don't have time to deal with that. I just wanted to get everybody else to sit down. So she went off. She ended up drawing this whole picture of herself, and then she wrote the word mad and then her name, and then came back to show us the picture. And then I just let her go off and do this thing. And then I ate with all the other kids. I just didn't, it's not like I chose to not pay attention. And I was thinking to myself, if this was my only kid, I would be up there being like, come to dinner. Now it's dinner. Come on, don't do this. I can't take this, Yeah. But I just couldn't. I didn't have the luxury of doing that. And then by the time we were all finishing, she came back in, showed us her little mad sign. And then she just walked over, sat down. She's like, oh, this really is good. I was like,
well, and so it worked in your favor because ideally, even if she had been your only kid, it sounds like that was the intervention that worked best. And it sounds like that's exactly what I was just describing in terms of taking away your attention, but not in an invested way. Right. You didn't really care or have time that she went upstairs, but that was the perfect message she needed. It was just like you're pulling away your attention in this case because you had to pay attention to the other kids. But it was just in a way that communicated to her, like, as you just said, go do your thing. And then she was able to, within that space, first of all, do something incredibly adaptive, which was write out her feelings and write the word and express how she was feeling, which then allowed her to come to the table and eat.
Yeah. But then I feel like, don't you feel like there's so much second guessing in parenting? Like, whenever I make a decision, I want to, in my head 50 times, I'm like, was that the right decision? Like, what message am I sending to the other kids? Like, now is nobody going to come to the table? Does she always think she gets to choose? Like, is this going to happen every single night?
Right. And
oh
that's
my gosh,
right.
this is it every single night. And then I freak out.
Yeah. And that's, first of all, that's parenting. Okay. So yes. So but second of all, those words, you got to beware those always and never words. Like that's what I was talking about with Henry with the ice in the middle of the night. Like I could have easily gone down that path. Well, if I get him ice tonight, he's going to want ice every single night and I'm never going to sleep full through the night again, which is a different thing. But, and that didn't happen. Yep. And if it had happened, I would have dealt with it. Like the book is kind of scattered with common question and answers. And this is one. It's like, how do I know when it's okay to give in or not? I'm second guessing myself all the time. It's just a choice point. It's one point in time. And to the extent you can remember that, and then afterwards, if you want to reflect on it in a helpful way, great, but not to beat yourself up and say like, well, now that I've done this, we're always going to be like this, or no one's ever going to eat, or because the message that you're sending to your kids, quote unquote, is ongoing and all the time. And the only times you beat yourself up about are those incidents. But there's a million times during the day you're sending them wonderful messages by just saying, hi, how are you? How was your day? And so it's just when we're faced with a behavior that we don't like, it's one choice point. And we make a choice. And then depending on how that goes, we make another choice the next time. And then again, if you notice, wow, every time my daughter doesn't want to eat, she's reacting this way, then you have enough information to maybe say, okay, well, what can I change that might change the pattern? But until there's a pattern, you're just dealing with one point in time, and there's no right or wrong answer most of the time. There's just an answer that you pick and choose, and then keep going and see where it leads you.
I love that. This also sort of dovetails with the whole section you wrote called Parenting That Inadvertently Reinforces Tantrums. And then under that you write, yep, you read that correctly. You can close this book now because at the end of the day, it's all totally your fault. Okay, I'm kidding with that last line. That was a good one.
Yeah, well, because parents come into my office and they feel like it's all their fault. And we're all just doing the best we can. And I hope that the book, there's a line in there that's like, while I'm writing this part, my younger kid is over in the corner, like hitting his head with a spoon or something. It's like, and yet I'm on deadline and have to write. We're all just doing the best we can. And it's about these large, we nitpick ourselves so much, and we think it's about these micro things. And it's not, which is not to let everybody off the hook. I wrote a whole book about different things you can do. It's just to say that one of the things that hurts us most is that level of self-criticism and beating ourselves up.
All right, I'll try to work on that. You write that when you're talking to a parent, you listen for language like, he won't let me, or she makes me. What do you do for people who may fall victim to this? Not that I necessarily know any of it. Well,
it's just about how you think about it, right? So you could say, my son didn't let me put on his socks this morning, or my son wouldn't, made me let him go to school without socks. Or you could say, my son got, just to yourself in terms of how you think about it, my son got really upset about wearing his socks this morning. And so I chose to not make him wear the socks. It's just about realizing that you have agency and that this little creature is not the one running the show. And that doesn't mean you can't choose on many occasions to do what your child is requesting. A big theme in the book is that there need to be equal balance of kind of love and limits in the home. So by all means, you're setting limits. You're just doing so in an intentional and thoughtful way where okay, so back to the ice, Henry's 2 a.m. ice craving. I said out loud to him, and I don't think it went in a way that he understood, but it was really therapeutic for me, and I think a good habit to get into. I said to him, you know what, I'm going to get you ice, and I'm going to get you ice because I've decided that's what's best for me and for our family. Again, it was 3 a.m, and he's 3, and he wasn't like, oh, okay, whatever. But the point is, it's not that he made me go get him ice at 2 a.m. And the more I can shift my mindset to saying, you know what, he woke up at 3 a.m, he was upset, he wanted ice, and then I chose to get it for him because I weighed the different options, helps us feel and be kind of the ones who are actually in the big picture in charge. So it's not so much about never giving into those things, it's about just the semantics of it and the thought process that often lies behind those semantics.
Got it. So what is your take on timeouts? If they start to have a tantrum, can you be like, this behavior is like unacceptable, I'm giving you a timeout? Or what if the timeout then leads to a tantrum? Do you just leave that?
So timeouts are one of the most widely misunderstood behavioral techniques out there. And there have been huge controversies over them. And in short, and I'm going to try not to get on a soapbox here, and I talk about this in the book. So timeouts are extraordinarily well-researched techniques that work as a very basic behavioral tool, which is to say, little children love attention more than anything in the world. And so one really good consequence for extinguishing a behavior is to take away your attention in a planned way. That's all a timeout is it's a timeout from attention. And a timeout from attention only works if the rest of the time, generally in your home, there's a positive, warm atmosphere where your kids are getting attention, right? So when people talk about, well, I do a time in, it's sort of like a time in should be kind of generally how things are. And a timeout is a timeout from attention. And it works for discrete behaviors. So behaviors that you can talk about ahead of time. So you talk about it with your kid, even if your kid is 3. You know, in this house, there's a timeout for if you try to hurt the dog, there's a timeout. And that's an established thing. And so when they go, and they agree to it, and when they go to hurt the dog, you say, oh, remember we talked about this, that's a timeout. And then a timeout happens in a very specific way that's been researched, which is that it's out in the open, on a chair or on a mat, no toys or books or whatever while they're doing it, and it's timed. So it's a minute per year. Timeouts don't work for tantrums because it's not a discrete behavior. You're basically saying, I'm giving you a negative consequence. I'm taking away my attention because you're upset. A tantrum is just what being really upset for a little kid looks like. And it doesn't work because you can't talk about it in advance or plan it or really say with a good conscience, like every time you get really upset, I'm going to put you in timeout. It's just not the healthy, good message. What you can do is take away your attention, as we talked about, in a non-emotional way and non-timeout. They don't have to go to a chair. They don't, but again, it's in an empathic way. Like, wow, you're having a really hard time with the fact that we're only getting one cookie. And I get it. Cookies are totally delicious. I know you can calm yourself down. And so I'm going to go in the other room and I can't wait to read a book with you when you're calm. Or that's, so again, it's that same idea. You're still taking away your attention, but you're not giving this negative consequence for an action that they've taken, because a tantrum, at least when it starts, it's just a behavioral manifestation of an emotion. If the tantrum then includes aggression, like hitting or whatever, I think you can give then it's where it's about the specific kid, and I don't think you are going to do anybody any favors by trying to give a timeout in the middle of a tantrum. And we can talk about these specific scenarios or not, but to the extent that you want to think about the discrete behaviors that happen as part of a tantrum, potentially in certain circumstances, those respond well to timeout, but I still don't think within the context of a tantrum, it's the best way to go.
Okay.
Does that clarify? Because it's so widely misunderstood and debated in a way that's not even what it was intended. It's frustrating.
It sounds like timeouts are sort of more like take a moment. Do you know what I mean? Like timeout has become, I think, like go to your room, close the door, like stay in there until, this is your punishment. Go to your, like kind of like when I was growing up, like go to your room.
Right. And they were never meant to be in the room. I mean, in your own, because among other things, once a kid realizes they're in their room and they're going to just be like, sweet, I'm in my room.
Well, that's sort of what I always felt.
Yeah.
When my mom's like, go to your room. I was like, I love my room.
Right.
There's no place I'd rather be. I'm going to sit and read and this is great.
A timeout is a timeout from attention for a set amount of time. You can set a timer. Right. If kids can't understand time, which most can't, you have a visual timer like they have in a lot of preschool classrooms where they can see the time going down in like the pie slice. But I think there's a real difference just to what you just said there. It's take a moment in the context of a tantrum. But in the context of like you see one of your kids go over and smack your other kid, which also happened. I mean, yesterday we were in the botanical gardens and my little one was walking and my older one just came up behind him and shoved him. Mm-hmm. That's not a tantrum.
Right. And
that's potentially a great example of something you could give a timeout for.
Yep.
And that would be the quote unquote like formal timeout. You know what? Now we're going to go sit for 3,
Yep.
So those are really distinct and they both can be useful in different circumstances.
When you were saying that part about pulling out your phone when you want to sort of take the attention away, basically, in the book you said that you listened to Van Morrison's Into the Mystic as a way to calm yourself down when your child is tantruming. And I feel like you played me that song. You introduced me to Van Morrison in high school, and it's still like now one of my favorite songs. Like Kyle and I danced to it at the wedding. Like it's like one of my favorites. So anyway.
That warms my heart.
No, it's true. I was sitting there like smiling, like flipping through. I was like, oh my God, she even put it in the book. Like after all this time, like our mixtapes and everything. Anyway, but so your kid's starting to tantrum, and are you really now like going into iTunes and like are you listening to it out loud? Are you putting in headphones? Like
you're like walk me through
how I do this.
So before we get to the nitty gritty, the context is that tantrums are interactions. They're not, and the book goes a lot into that it's family dynamics and interactions. Your kid is not having a tantrum in a vacuum. Your kid is starting to exhibit some behavior, which then causes you to exhibit some behavior, and they and you and they and it takes two to really, really amp up. Not always, but the best thing you can do as a parent in a tantrum situation is to stay regulated and stay calm. And there are different ways to do that. You can feel both your feet on the ground. You can take a deep breath. You can close your eyes and remember the first time you held your child as a baby, when they like exploded your heart. There's different ways to do it, but it's so important because there's this great expression that I did not make up, so I can't take credit for. Be the thermostat and not the thermometer. You're there to set the temperature, not to let your child set the temperature and you just measure it. So one of you has to get calm and regulated for the other one to feel better. And sadly, your kid's not going to pick up that task.
Got it. Yep.
And so music is one way that for me can really help. And so I think most of the time I do it, frankly, when I feel like the atmosphere is just ripe for a tantrum.
Yep.
Like after a long day, we get home from preschool and daycare. I've had a tough day. I'm exhausted. The last thing I feel like doing is giving my kids dinner. One of them is already complaining that it's a bath night. Then it's like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put on Into the Mystic. They're going to want me to put on Paw Patrol soundtrack, but I'm going to, I need that to get myself to a better place so that this whole evening goes smoother. Occasionally, though, what you said is true, which is that my kid will actually start to have a tantrum, and I've had clients that say this works too, and you do go into iTunes because you say, I really need to get myself to a different place to be able to see this person as anything other than like the most annoying person ever. Yeah. And the way I'm going to do that is with music. It's senses. It also can be eating something that just going, like a lot of times it's about, you get so frustrated with your kid and then you realize you haven't had a sandwich for 6 hours.
Right. Yep.
So it's just getting yourself back in your body, back in your senses in a regulated place so that then you can have that pause that we talked about where you can be more thoughtful and intentional about how you want to approach a situation.
There's this other song called Let's Be Still. Do you know that song? Like, you can get lost in the moment forever. I'll stop.
Go for it, sis.
No. Anyway, it's really good, but that's like my go-to song if I'm like having a nervous breakdown myself because it's called like Let's Be Still. Anyway.
There's also, you can go the opposite route and put on like a dance song.
Right.
Sometimes when my kids are making me crazy, I just blast a dance song and we all dance. And it takes, because it's that same energy of like that excited, like, energy, except instead of, channeling it toward my kids, I'm like really dancing and they're really dancing. And usually they look so cute that then that shifts my mind, and again, it's about shifting that, it's being the thermostat. I'm not going to come in and get, sucked into your drama that you pulled your hair and you took your Legos and whatever. I'm actually going to come in and put on dance music and change the whole tone because I'm the parent and I can do that.
So last question, what is the best piece of parenting advice someone has given you? Because you give everybody else so much advice. That's so great.
The best piece of I would say, and I talk about this a lot, that it's not direct parenting advice, but I often think about, two quotes I was going to say. One is, I think, Marianne Williamson, when she says something about how the way to change the world is by changing how you interact with your child. So that, and not each individual interaction, but I really feel like if we can all start to be more empathic with our kids and see them as people and deal with emotions in a healthier way, we can change the larger scheme of things. And then more directly, there's a Maya Angelou quote that I'm not going to remember, but it's something like, people will forget the words you say, people will forget where you were, but they'll never forget the way you made them feel.
Aww.
And I think about that a lot with my parenting, particularly when, as you said, like when I'm in a cycle of beating myself up about something I did wrong or said wrong, it's like, well, what can I do now so that my kids remember how I'm, you can go back, you can apologize, you can have a snuggle, you can just, I want my kids to feel overall, not every second of every day, we're all human, but overall, how do I help them feel loved, seen, heard, understood? And that helps me be less critical with the exact words I choose in any given situation.
Awesome. Well, that was great. Thank you.
you.
Thank you for giving me some extra little tools for the toolbox of parenting, which is the most important toolbox to carry around these days. And for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this amazing podcast and for having me on here again. If our younger selves could see us. But yeah, this has been a real treat. So thank you.
Thanks, Reeves. This episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books has been brought to you by Nini's Treats. Nini'sTreats.com, available also on Goldbelly.com. Thanks to Ryan and Steve at Texture Sound for the audio editing and mixing. Thanks for listening.